And then Gail Andrus came to me one day. She was a member of the ward. Her husband became a bishopric member with Reed when he was the counselor to Kay Clifford. And so they were a family that had loved us and befriended us from the first day we'd moved into the ward. And Gail was a realtor. And she said, I think it's time you kids buy a house. And we just laughed at her. We said, we have no money. We can't buy a house. We don't have any savings. And she said, I have a neighbor who is a school teacher, and she likes to invest her extra money, and it's good for her to make personal loans to people such as you, people who need some cash for whatever reason. She said, I can arrange, I think it was $500 that we borrowed from her friend, and that $500 became our down payment to our house on LaRosa that was Temple City. But it was still in the ward, but it was out of the Arcadia School District. It was in the El Monte School District, and that was my only hesitation. But it was a nice home. It was in a cul-de-sac. We had LDS neighbors, the Sessions, and it was not a big home, but it was a 3-bedroom home. So Karen and Reed each had their own bedroom. Dad and I had one, and it was 1.5 bath. We had a half bath off the master bedroom, and a nice enclosed backyard. It was a nice starter home. And Reed went to 3rd and 4th grade there, and Karen went to 1st and 2nd. And it was good schools. We loved those schools. We loved our time there, but I was always anxious to move back into the Arcadia School District because I felt that's where we wanted the kids to live. So one of the highlights that I remember from our time on LaRosa was that Reed's 3rd grade teacher decided to take the kids on a field trip. They gave kids more latitude in school, I think, than they do now. And so she arranged this trip, and it was just parents loading up the kids into the cars. And we drove down to Capistrano Beach, where the swallows come back to Capistrano, and played in the ocean. And Reed found a little shark about this long that was dead. And he knew he had to bring that back. So we stuck that stinking dead shark in the back of my car, and we brought that back. I don't know that we kept it too long before we threw it away, but he insisted that was a shark and he had to bring it home. But that was the sort of experiences that we had in our house, or during the time when we lived in that house on LaRosa, and loved the teachers, loved the experiences for the school. So I don't think the kids skipped a beat. That's when Reed decided he wanted a bike, and his dad said he wanted a 10-speed bike, and his dad said, well, did you earn the whole thing or part of it?
Whole thing.
The whole thing. That was my memory.
That's Lindros.
That was Lindros. But do you have a bicycle memory that I remember from living on LaRosa that you forgot and left your bike at school one day and it got stolen? And your grandpa Gunnell was so up in arms when he heard about that he wanted to give you the money to buy another bike. Your Grandpa Gunnell, I don't know if you knew that about him. And the next day or 2 or 3 days later, we found the bike, and so it was somebody just having mischievous fun with it. So Grandpa didn't have to come, but he was proud of you. Your Grandma and Grandpa Gunnell really loved you. When you were a baby, they would do extra things for you with our promise not to let the other grandkids know, because they didn't want to be showing an obvious favoritism. but you had a special love from the time you were born, from your grandma and grandpa Gunnell, that they always favored you. That's okay, as long as it wasn't obvious to everybody else. But I remember we went on a vacation one time, and our very next door neighbors, I said the Sessions across the street, but the Luces lived next door to us, and they were members of our ward, Pat and Dick Luce. And we went on a vacation, and since we didn't really want pets too much, I was not a pet lover, but we let Reed, we bought him an aquarium, and he had fish. And I remember one time we'd gone on vacation and the Luces took care of the fish, but some way one died when we came home. And I said, flush it down the toilet. And you've never seen a boy cry harder than Reed cried when one of his fish died and he had to flush it down the toilet hole. But we had a cat, Arlene Smith, kept trying to give us cats. And we tried one or two that I didn't like because I couldn't keep them house trained. But then we had a little calico. Do you remember the calico cat? I think we called her Tinkerbell.
I do.
And if she got caught in the house and had to use the bathroom, she went into the bathtub. So I loved that cat. And we lost her because she loved to roam around the neighborhood. And she roamed around and never came back. And she was so curious. I hoped that at least she jumped into the open window of somebody's car and, you know, didn't come to a bad end. But we lost Tinkerbell. And we tried a little puppy that was given to us that was a boxer. We had to put rubber bands around his tail, but I never did like him. We gave him away. I don't know if you even remember him. The kids couldn't go out in the backyard with him because he messed up the whole backyard. And so I gave him away to somebody who wanted a boxer worse than I did. But that's when Reed played Little League ball with Tim Sessions. At least he started. Played a couple of years and played catcher, and we went to the ball games, and so those were happy couple of years. But back to when I wanted to go back to Cal State and get a degree after I had a few more classes under my belt at Cal State, I found out that I could do some substitute teaching in the El Monte School District. And Sister Sessions, can't think of her first name, but her little girl was younger than Karen, Kim, but she loved Karen. And Sister Sessions didn't work, and so Karen was in school, and if I substituted, that was the only difference, is to get home in time for you kids. And so Jean Sessions, because you were a buddy with Tim, who was a year older, and Karen was a friend with Kim, who was a year or so younger. And so Jean, which she never would let me pay her for it, he was just kind of playing there at her house until I could get home. And I started substituting in the El Monte School District, and about the second or third time that I substituted, it was for a first grade teacher who ended up having surgery, and they had me for the rest of the year. I finished out that year at just a neighborhood. It wasn't too far south of us, elementary school, and I had all of the teachers' materials to work with. I told you I had taught kindergarten the last year in Afton, so now I had a chance to teach first grade with a seasoned teacher that I had all of her extra materials to work with. And I finished out that year, and at the end of the year, I said to the principal, is there any chance you would hire me full-time? Because I was still I had a provisional teaching credential. I was still going to Cal State, I knew eventually I would have a regular credential. And he said, no, I would rather you get your degree first and then come back and ask me. And then Tom Nyson, who was the head of, at least he was on the school board of Arcadia High School, Arcadia School District, and he found out that I was teaching in El Monte, and you thought he took it as a personal insult. He said, we can't have you down there teaching. And they were good kids. I enjoyed the experience, but he got me a job in Arcadia, full-time job teaching 5th grade at Hugo Reed School, one of the top educational school districts in the whole state, and he used his influence and got me a full-time job teaching 5th grade. And that's when we had moved on. But that was my teaching experience. And I taught 1 year, and at the end of the year I was pregnant with Julie and I quit. So my teaching and being out of the home were after you kids were in school, so I wasn't leaving you with the sitter, except for that time in Afton, the mornings with kindergarten. And they never ever lasted very long. But I did, I must have taught that 5th grade when we were still on LaRosa, because I became, no, I was pregnant with David, I take it back. I taught that year and I was pregnant with Julie, but when we were still at LaRosa, I thought, I can't have a baby. I have no room for her. We only have a 3-bedroom house. Reed has 1 room, Karen has the other, and we have ours. And so we have to buy another home. And so we did. We ended up in a brand new home.
Are we done with LaRosa yet?
I think so. I can't think of much else.
Now tell us about your church callings when you were in LaRosa.
I can't remember which was which.
You taught in primary.
Did I teach in primary?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in junior Sunday school. I don't remember where I taught.
Okay.
My early calls in the church were either primary, junior Sunday school, and Relief Society when I became a counselor for a year or so, homemaking counselor, which I was the least qualified to be, but I was working with wonderful women. And
now on LaRosa, did Dad continue to work odd jobs?
no. He only worked odd jobs when we were trying to get out of debt in Naomi. I don't remember him ever working any odd jobs. Once he got involved, really involved with the church, and we were on our feet, and he was making good enough money, and he would work. He would teach some summers, and some summers he couldn't, but they always gave him opportunities to teach the summer quarter. It was on a quarter basis, and his salary by choice went year-round for the 3 regular quarters he taught. So that was always our bonus money for him to teach in the summertime. And so we made the habit of, we paid cash for our cars. We would get used cars, but we never went into debt because we would use our his summer money. Oh, I'd take it back. Dad did things like paint houses in the summertime, that sort of thing, but it was in the summertime, not during the school years.
Not like the gas station or Henshaw's
Right.
or that stuff.
No, in the summertime, the summers that he wasn't teaching, he painted houses, and he was such a good self-taught painter that people loved to hire him. Wayne Steinley and Dr. Harris, that's how you kids got your braces such as they were, because he would trade labor with Glenn Harris and paint his house, and he would fix you kids' teeth. But he wasn't an orthodontist, so he did the best we could for you, but it wasn't as good as maybe an orthodontist would have done. But it was later when we went to Hawaii. So that's about, our next door neighbor were the Pat, what was their names? They were not members of the church. Oki. Pat Oki. They were a couple with one child, and he was Karen's age, but he idolized Reed. And they loved us. They were such good neighbors. We never could convince them to come to church, but she said to me one time, I've learned things about your church. You're always coming and going somewhere. You never stay put. Because she would watch us go to church, and she would watch us go, Dad go to Young Men, and she would watch me take the kids to primary, and we always invited Pat if he wanted to go, and I can't remember that he ever did, but he was they were good neighbors and good friends. Dad and I both, I think, always made friends wherever we lived, because we love people and the kids. It's easy when you live someplace and you have kids, because the kids are the catalyst to help you get acquainted with your neighbors. So I really can't think of too much else.
Okay.
They were happy years.
Okay, so now.
Oh, one thing I did about Dad when we were still on LaRosa, because I can still see the picture of it in my mind. We were having a young marrieds party at our house, because we had a lot of people around our age or a little bit older, and we just loved to do things. And the telephone rang out in the kitchen, and it was for Dad, and I called him. And it was a man, and I wish I could remember his name, but he was a man that was hired for a year or so at BYU as a football coach. And he was calling Dad, asking him if he were interested in taking an assistant football coaching job at BYU. And Dad thought it was a joke, because he had a friend named Wendell Daines who was always pulling jokes. And I don't know what that football coach said, but he said, oh, come on, Wendell, you know. And he finally convinced Dad that he was really who he said he was. And Dad was offered a job to come to BYU. Interestingly enough, it was the same year that Lavelle Edwards was hired at BYU. And I don't know if that was in lieu of Dad, or if he would have been coaching with Lavelle. I have no idea. But that's the year that Lavelle Edwards, I think, became part of the coaching staff at BYU. And we thought about it, and it was a single wing coaching system, and Dad had never coached single wing, and he didn't think he'd like that. And we loved West Arcadia Ward. We were married to West Arcadia Ward. That's where we had found the gospel, and that's where our life was. Nobody wanted to leave. Dad didn't want to leave, and he turned it down, because we were so happy with all of our friends and with our associations, with our church callings, with our life in California, having found the gospel. Even though it would have been going back to BYU, we were not wedded to BYU like we are now, because neither one of us had gone to school there. The kids weren't old enough to have gone to school there. And we just loved our life the way it was. And so we Dad turned down more than one opportunity to be at BYU, because we loved where we were. We loved our life. We loved the people. We loved the gospel. We call it the glory days of Arcadia, because the priesthood leadership was so strong, and we felt like we anchored our testimony there, and our children all anchored their testimony among strong members of the church and great priesthood leadership there. And it's not that way anymore. It has changed. Still good people that live there, but nothing like it was in those years. So we lived we never changed wards. We moved around. We rented on Naomi. We moved to LaRosa, and then you'll hear we moved again. But we always stayed within the ward boundaries. And the only reason I could come, and I'm jumping way ahead, but just to show you our family devotion, the only reason that I could really agree to Dad's going to BYU to work on his doctorate was that I knew we would be coming back, because my heart was so deeply embedded with the people of Arcadia, our dear friends. And so that takes us through LaRosa. I can't think of anything else.
I believe the Bear Lake probably happened while we were at LaRosa.
The Bear Lake.
Your young women, when you took the young women up to Bear Lake with me, and I got lost.
Oh, yes. Yes, I was teaching in primary. It wasn't Bear Lake. It was
Lake Arrowhead?
It was Lake Arrowhead.
Okay.
That's what was throwing me there. We took our, Betty DeGotti was one of our primary teachers when I was working in primary, and they had a cabin up at Lake Arrowhead. And she offered it for an outing to take our primary kids. I was working with the three oldest groups in primary. Their names changed so many times I can't remember which they were. But we decided, and so we just went by carloads, and it was just for a day to go up to Bear Lake. We had this, not Bear Lake, Lake Arrowhead, and we had this cabin we could go to in the mountains and then drive just a couple of miles down to the lake and let the girls go swimming. And of course I didn't go anywhere without our children, so Reed and Karen went in the car, and then I took however many girls would fit in, and there were a few carloads of it, and we drove down and splashed around and had fun in the lake with the girls, and then we drove back and we ate, and Reed was in and out and here and there, and I could see him all before we went, and I didn't pay too much attention to him because I had all these girls, and to look after too. But we got ready. It was getting close to time to go home, and I couldn't find Reed. And I walked around, and I walked to the other cabins, because it wasn't a cabin by itself. There were other cabins, but they were all in the trees. And nobody remembered seeing Reed. And we looked, and we called, and we checked the other cabins, and we couldn't find him. And then I got really frightened, and I prayed earnestly, very earnestly, to Heavenly Father, please bless my little boy wherever he was and help us to find him. Because he was really lost. He wasn't anywhere around that camp. And the group was ready to go home. People remembered him playing earlier in the day, but nobody remembered seeing him after the lake. And I was getting beside myself. I didn't know what to do. I had turned to the Lord because I didn't know where else to turn. And then a car drove up, and my little boy got out. And before I could even thank him, he was gone. I never ever met the person who rescued our son. Never knew him. And Reed's version, I think, differs from mine a little bit, but my version is that he got out of the car when we came back from the lake, and he was just dressed in his swimsuit, and he saw a squirrel. And he ran after the squirrel to chase the squirrel, and he got out of the side of our cabin. And then he was in the trees, and he was turned around, and he didn't know what to do, so he just started walking, and he walked downhill, and he finally came to the road that led to the lake. And according to my memory and things he told me at the time, he started walking along the road and realized how old were you?
Probably 8 or 10.
I'm thinking about 8 years old. That he was going the wrong direction, that he was going toward the lake, and he knew the cabin was away from the lake. So he turned around and walked back to where he had come out of the woods and sat down and started to cry because he knew he was lost. And a man came along on the road and stopped and said, "Are you lost?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Are you from Arcadia?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Get in the car and I will take you back to your mother." That's my memory. And I know that Heavenly Father blessed somebody to find my little boy and bring him back, because he was lost. And I was devastated that I thought I might have lost him, because, as you know, little kids get lost in the mountains sometimes, and they're not always easily found. But he did. He came back, and that was one of my blessings from a loving Heavenly Father who heard my pleadings for a lost child and moved upon somebody. I would never know who. The man dropped him off and didn't stay long enough for me to see him, find out who he was, or express gratitude. But he dropped my little boy off. And that was one of the many, many miracles I've had through my life, where I have been in need, and I've turned to my Father in heaven, and He has answered my prayers.
Good.
So
you decided that now were you pregnant with Julie, or were you just wanting another baby when you...
Oh, I wanted another baby ever since Karen was born. We always wanted another baby, and we just were not blessed with one for 8.5 years, and that's kind of why I decided when the kids are in school, I'll pursue my education and I'll go back to teach. So we were still in LaRosa that year. I taught full-time. It was a hard year. I carried a stack of books this tall home every night. I carried them back the next day. But I was home with the family by and large. The one thing concrete that I gained from that year of teaching, I took the extra money that I earned and we bought our piano. The piano I still have. Karen was just, she would play song flute at first grade. She wanted to play so badly, and I bought that piano. And you wanted to take lessons too. So you both took lessons, and that was the one thing I gained from that year teaching. But by the time spring came, I knew I was pregnant, that I had a baby coming, and so I resigned. I did not sign the contract for the next year. She was born in January, so it would have been hard, but I didn't really want to teach. I wanted to be a mama. And interestingly enough, too, we used to have the auxiliaries all had big Christmas parties of their own. Dad and I loved Christmas time because he was in the bishopric, and so we could go to the primary party because I worked in primary, but we went to all the other auxiliaries because the bishopric got invited to Relief Society, Elders Quorum, young men, young women, whatever. Every auxiliary had their party, so we had a grand time at Christmas time. But I remember I went to this Christmas party, and they had gag gifts for white elephants, And the white elephant gift I got, and I had no way of knowing I was pregnant, I got a bottle of pickles for pregnant women. That was the gag gift. I got this bottle of pickles that was a gift for pregnant women, and I laughed about that. And we went to Manan for Christmas, or to Idaho. We hit both parents during the Christmas. And I started upchucking in Manan, and that's when I knew I was pregnant, right after Christmas. Right after I'd gotten that bottle of pickles for pregnant women.
Well, that must have been with Sherry then.
No, that was with Julie.
Julie was born in January. You couldn't have been pregnant at Christmas time and not known it.
I remember that, well, how could I remember? I got pregnant with somebody.
Must have been Cher. Cher was born in August.
Well, anyhow, I got pregnant with Julie while we lived
On LaRosa.
on LaRosa, so I have that mixed up.
Okay.
Okay, so it probably was Sherry. But happy day, because we wanted children so badly. And Karen and Reed used to beg us, let's adopt a baby. They wanted a baby too. And a funny thing, and so it was such a blessing. Arlene Smith and I were best friends, and Dad and Terry were good friends, and we both got pregnant. Julie was born the 29th of January, and Tracy was born the middle of February, close around Valentine's Day. I can't remember the exact day, but that's how close we were. And the men went off to conference, probably June conference, the two of them together, and Arlene and I stayed home. She was going to Cal State too. We had so much in common. And she confessed to me that she was pregnant, and I confessed to her, and because we had to tell somebody, and we kept our secret. And the men hardly got out on the highway heading towards Salt Lake for conference, and I don't know which one spilled the beans first, but Terry and Dad each shared that they were going to be fathers again. And then right after that, as soon as school was out, we went on quite a long vacation to Idaho and up to Wyoming. I don't remember where all we went. So we told the kids as soon as we were in the car that we were going to have a baby. And they were so excited, and they didn't have anybody. Arlene kept my secret, I kept hers. Terry didn't tell us, and by the time I got home, I was wearing maternity clothes. And so I came home from vacation and showed up at West Arcadia Ward in maternity clothes. And that was a fun thing. And Julie became the ward, even though there were others, Clark Clifford and Tracy Smith and Lila Rogers had Susie Rogers. There was a group of babies all born right close together. But the ward loved Dad and I. They loved all those other two. We'd like to feel like we were very well loved. But Julie was such a darling little wide-eyed, blue-eyed baby that everybody loved her. And Reed loved her so much. In those days, they had a room in the church that was filled with, 4 to 6 cribs. And they hired an elderly, non-member couple to be the nursery keepers there. And we had the luxury of taking babes in arm to church and depositing them in the nursery where they were cared for while we went to enjoy. But I seldom, if ever, got to retrieve Julie from the nursery because Reed Jr., Reed Wayne, always just bust his buttons to be there first to get his baby sister out of the nursery because he loved her so much, and it was so fun to have a baby after all of our dry years with just the two of them. And how blessed we were that we had 3 more children. We couldn't have loved our first 2 more, but our life became so much richer with more children. than if we'd had just two and been empty nesters for such a long time. So we always felt Heavenly Father blessed us, and they were each born in the covenant, so it was such a great blessing in our life to be blessed with an additional 3 children from those. And I was in primary, and I have to tell this on Reed, because whatever I taught primary, whatever group it was, I had to teach them to knit, and I didn't know how to knit. And so Lonnie Danes taught me how to knit, and if I dropped a stitch, I had to go to her and she helped me pick it up. But we would knit house slippers. It was just 2 long strips, and then you knit them together at the end and a little bit over at the top anyhow. And Reed Jr. was fascinated with that, and so I taught him to knit, and he knit himself. Do you remember this? A pair of house slippers, and his dad had a royal fit that I would presume to teach our son a girly thing, and I said, forget it. He wants to do it. He'll love it. It's a good experience, and it's not going to take him off the track of following his dad in sports, and it didn't. But Reed learned to knit, and I taught primary, and I taught it to him.